Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Menachos daf Mem Beis. We're going to begin on Mem Beis Amud Aleph, about 8 lines from the top with the word Tanrabana. So the Gemara says as follows: Tzitzis, ein tzitzis el enough. When it comes to the tzitzis, that's referring to the area where the strings protrude outward. V'cheinu oimer, as the pasuk says in Yecheskel, that I will take the tzitzis from the head, which means it's talking about the area where it's the tzitzis come out. The Amar Rabbi v'tzarech lefreida kitzutzisa da'aramoy. It needs to come out comparable to the tzitzis of the aramoy. Says Rashi, Devukos milmata, that they're attached at the bottom, uprudois milmal, when they spread out at the top. Tanrabanan, hitil al hakeren. Let's say you put the actual tzitzis on the actual edge, as Rashi says, al sfas chudesh hakeren, on the edge of the tip of the corner. O al hagadil, says Rashi, chut avi, of a thick string, v'chazak bebeged techila, kedei shel yehei noach likarea, so it doesn't rip. So basically the question is, can you put the tzitzis mamish on the corner? So Rabbi Elazar and Yankiv Omer Pasul b'shteyin. They're both Pasuls. Come on, Azla. So fine. So one opinion is Kshera. Rabbi Elazar and Yaakov Omer Pasul b'shteyin. So come on, Azla ha diyam Rav Gidol Omer Ram tzitzis sricha shtei noitves al karen. They need to be hanging on the corner. Fine. So basically, as Rashi says, it doesn't mean mamash on the corner, but it has to be lifted up enough above from the edge. Kadesh shitehei toila, it's hanging v'noigas hatolia b'karen, so that when it's hanging, it ends up hitting the corner. So how do we know that that's the requirement? Shinemar, because it says al kanfei bignehem, that it should be on it, should be on the corner. So come on, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. This is like the sheet of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, who says it's possible for it to be mamish right on the corner, but it's got to be just a little bit further away so that it could land onto the corner. So Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'sarch sheyarchik moli kesher gaidol. We had this before, that it should be 3 etzba'os from the corner, but it shouldn't be mamish on the corner. It needs to be at least the joint of the thumb from the corner. So it has to be a little bit of a distance, as Rashi says, Sarshiach b'yena min asaf, has to be removed from the edge, moli kesher goidel, the thumb, the shir hatzipoirin, im basar ad perik rishain. So it's not this way, but it's talking until the first joint. It should be about this much space, is how far it should be from the corner. Now, Visrach Rapap Visrach Rav Yaakov. The Rapapa Havamina Tay Gimel Dolo Lirchak Tvei Vakama Demikarav Mali. It says that it shouldn't be 3 etzba'os. He mentions 3 etzba'os, which is mashma. Maybe it should be further than 3 etzba'os. There's already, look, it's in the middle of the beged. But maybe it could be within 3 etzba'os, and it could be very, very close, even to the very corner. So therefore, the point is that no, it has to be at least removed from the corner, the amount of the thumb. Itzrach Rav Yaakov, v'im de Rav Yaakov hava mina moli kesher gaida dolikar tvei. Maybe it means that it can't be that close. However, v'kama derachik mali, you can make it very far, even more than 3 etzba'os, sricha, and therefore it has to be basically in between this thumb amount and the 3 etzba'os. Ravina Rav Sama, Havi Yasvi Kimei Rav Ashi. So these two great scholars were sitting in front of Rav Ashi. Chazia Rav Tzama. So Rav Tzama noticed the Lakarnid Galime de Ravina, that the garment of Ravina saucer. It was like ripped. There was an issue with the part of the corner of where the tzitzis were. Because of that, the tzitzis actually ended up coming close to the corner, even closer than the thumb's edge. So Amalei L'Sebel Amar L'Had Rav Yaakov, don't you hold to the din that it has to be distance from the corner? So Amalei no B'Shas Asiya Idmar. The only time it has to be done properly is when it's made. However, if it tears a little bit and then afterwards it comes close to the corner, it's not a problem. So Ichsif, he was embarrassed because he was like, you know what, maybe, so Rav Sama was embarrassed about that. Again, on one hand, he saw what happened, and he called him out on it, and now he's embarrassed. So Amalei Rav Ashi, lo taskif, don't be upset. Chad minayhu, one of them is Katrei Minan, is like two of us. It says Rashi, B'nei Eretz Yisrael, the two, one of them who are from Eretz Yisrael, Ravina Eretz Yisrael Havi. So Ravina, he tried to stump, and then he ended up basically giving you this answer. So don't worry about it. He's from Eretz Yisrael, so therefore he's greater than us by two, like two people. Okay. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Rami Arba, so he actually took 4 strings. The ayaful hu mayif, umayil hu galima. So he actually doubled them over before he hanged the tzitzis. So basically, he made 4, flipped them open, flipped them, doubled them to make into 8, which is what we do. Va'avikul hu mivak, and then he made a knot. Okay. Ksavar b'inan tamne beglima, because he holds you have to have 8. Kehechel havi gedil gedilim b'makam psil. So this is based on the drasha, as Rashi says. Gedil is shtayim, is 2. Gedilim is another tarti, is 2. Masha shena or bachute, that's 4. Yachakach kaifun l'shmoina, and then you flip them and double them to make it 8. However, Rav Yirmiyah Medifti Rami Tamya, he actually took 8 strings, the inhu shitzar, which by doubling them over, he made them into 16. Vo aviklo, but he did not make a slip knot. So Marbarei Ravina Avid Kedidan, and Marbarei does like what we do. Basically, as our minhag, as Rashi says, that we put 4 strings in, and then afterwards, we double them into 8. So basically, as we do, we take 4 strings, we insert it into the hole, and therefore we even them up. So there's 4 on one side, 4 on the other, which ends up being 8, which is what we basically do. That's our minhag when we make our tzitzis. Rav Nachman Ashche Rav Ada Barava, so he found Rav Ada Barava Rami Chuti, that he was making tzitzis for his talis. He was putting in strings. And when he was making the bracha, he was made a bracha when he made the tzitzis, which we're not naig. So Amalei might tzitzi shemana hacha. What was this tzitzi word over here? And Rashi says it's like he's saying like some type of a gesture, joking manner, because he was basically indicating that you really don't make a bracha when you make the tzitzis. You make the bracha when you put on the tzitzis. Rav tzitzis ein tzricha bracha. You don't make a bracha upon making them. So kir nach nafshe the Rav Huna, when Rav Huna died, al Rav Chista lemirma derav, lemirma derav derav. He asked a kasha, a stira, Rav derav. Mi omer Rav tzitzis ein tzarich bracha. Is it true that as we said, that Rav holds that tzitzis ein tzricha bracha? What do you mean? V'ha'im Rav Yehuda Rav. Rav says menayin l'tzitzis b'oivik hachavim shipsula. How do we know that if an oivik hachavim, an idol worshiper, makes tzitzis that they're possible? Shnemer daber b'nei Yisrael v'yasul hem tzitzis b'nei Yisrael yasu v'oivik hachavim yasu. Only Yid makes tzitzis and not an akum. So 1 second. So v'ham ma'iromia. Where's the stira? So no, it's a stira. Rav and to Rav. What? What's the stira? Rav said you don't make a bracha when you make tzitzis, okay? And now we're saying a stira that an akum cannot make tzitzis. What does that have to do with a stira? How is that a stira? Now, Rav Chisda holds like this: Kol mitzvah shekasher b'chachavim b'Yisrael ein sarach levarich. If you have any situation where an akum can do something and it's allowed, it's kosher, then when a yid does that same thing, there's no bracha. Anytime, this is a general rule in which the yid, an akum, cannot do it, so when the yid does it, so he makes a bracha. Okay, so basically what he's saying is that when it comes to an akum, he's not allowed to make the tzitzis. And since he's not allowed to make the tzitzis, so then a yid is supposed to say a bracha. So that's a stira. Okay. So 1 second, Gemara says 1 second. It's the klolahu. Is that truly a general rule? By milah, when it comes to a bris milah, if you have a moil who happens also to be an akum, it works. The sanya. So preferably you should use a yid. Well, let's say there's no roife, there's no moil, as Rashi says, who's a Jew. So what should you do? So v'yesho roife or a moy v'roife kuti. So you have these choices. Which one should you use? So this shita says yimel or a moy v'al yimel kuti. Don't use a kuti. Dibra meir. What's so bad about a kuti? If he knows what he's doing, so Rashi says, because when he does it, as is brought down in the Satas Avodah Zarah, he's going to end up having the wrong kavanas, that he's not doing it l'shem mitzvah, he's doing it l'shem Avodah Zarah, and therefore for that reason we don't want to use the kuti. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer kuti v'lo armoy. Actually, better use the kuti than the armoy. Yisrael sarach levarich. And the yid has to make the bracha. Now, what do we say? An akum, basically we're talking about an akum here, he could do the milah. Now, based on the rule that we said, if an akum could do a mitzvah, then the yid doesn't make the bracha. But it says over here, so that klal doesn't make sense. Where it says the whole issue is only because it was a steer of Rav. Rav mifsal posel. He taka holds that the akum is posel. So actually, it's a support to him. Because it's possible for the akum to do the milah, so therefore the yid makes a bracha. So it is consistent. How do we know? So Dor Bar Papa, which is famous for the siyumim, he said Mishmei Rav. That Rav said the ata as brisi tishmor. So what do we see from that pasuk? It says Rashi, "V'nimol k'moischa ni moisroi." So this pasuk says, "I'm giving you this bris to mamish to help like the bris milah, and it's dafka yid, not an akum." Yochanan himol yimoil. He used a different drasha, and you could read it as himol yimoil. Someone who had bris milah, he's shaykh to do the milah. An akum who's not shaykh to do bris milah for himself, he doesn't do milah. Okay, fine. So that seems to be taka shtikul akasha already on this klal. Okay, all right. So let's continue. So Masayle, so Sukkah is going to be a Masayle and Tefillin Havi Tiyufta. So based on all this, Sukkah is going to be a proof to our statement, and Tefillin will be a steer, and that's going to be question 12 in a second. We'll hold off on that. So what is Sukkah? Hari Sukkah Diksher B'Chachavim. An akum can make a sukkah for you. The sanya sukkahs oiv kachavim, which is it shouldn't be oiv kachavim. The Gemara there calls it sukkahs ganvach, right? The Gemara in sukkah and daf ches. So we'll call it oiv kachavim, sukkahs noshim, woman, sukkahs behema, sukkahs kutim. So these are all people that are not enim mechuyev in the mitzvah of sukkah. So sukkah mikol makom kshera, as it's brought down in the Gemara, first paragraph of Masechtas Sukkah, as Rashi reminds us. It's definitely kosher. When they put it, it had to be l'shem schach. It had to be that you're doing it for the sake of schach. Yisrael, so therefore, what do we see? An akum is allowed to build, and yet, therefore, Yisrael in Sarach Havarach. It's interesting language. Ein Sarach Havarach. I should say Yisrael it does not make a bracha, but okay. This time, if you make a sukkah yourself, Oimer bracha ta Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'achenu v'keiman v'gedol hazman hazeh. But when you're sitting in an Oimer bracha ta Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam Hashem Hashem v'sasav v'tzivanu leisha v'sukkah v'yolasei sukkah lo mavarich. Actually, to build a sukkah, we don't say. You only say the bracha of leisha v'sukkah, and we're known to do the shachiyanu at the kiddush, as the Gemara in Sukkah over there says. Of course, that's our minhag on Sukkah's night to make the shachiyanu. So, and some say that's taka on the asiyah, okay, but let's just keep it pashut. Over here, the reading is that when it comes to a sukkah, because an akum could do it, so therefore we don't make a bracha. So that's actually a raya. However, tefillin will be a tiyufta. V'har tefillin to psules b'avkachavim. So tefillin is puzzle for an akum to make, as we're going to see in a second. So this is going to be question in the second question 12. All right, just mark this down over here. So, how do we see that? The Tani Rav Chinna Berei Rava, he warns as follows as we continue to Amud Beis. He says, Mifash Ranei, which is the name of a place, Sefer Torah, Tefillin, Mezuzos, which we also call Stam, Shikosvin, that they're all written by a Tzeduki, which doesn't believe in Torah Shabbat Peh, Kuti, which again are the Gerarayos, the whole Shaila of Kachavim, Eved, Ish of a Katan, so they're not Matsuva in Talmud Torah. A Mummer, it's not clear if it's a Mummer or Teyavoim or Malachas, but this is a Mummer, Psul. Why are they apostle? Shnemer Kshartim Uksavtem. Kol Shishtim Kshira Yishtim Ksiva. Now, is a Mummer not Matsuving Kshira? Okay, so anyone who doesn't put on the tefillin, they don't have the ksiva, which is including, it says Uksavtem writing mezuzos, but it means stam, Sefer Torah tefillin mezuzos. Kol she'einu b'kshir inu b'ksiva. So an akum definitely is not matzuva in tefillin. So there's not. So they don't write. They shouldn't write Sefer Torah. But nonetheless, Yisrael in Sarach Havarach. So that's going to be the tiyufta, right? It says that when an oivik kachavim, right, we say is possible, right? Because kol she'eino b'kshira eino b'ksiva. So this is question 13. All right. Oh, question 12 rather. Let's see what the question is. Ksavar kol mitzvah shekashir ba'akum b'Yisrael in Sarach Havarach kol mitzvah shepsul ba'akum b'Yisrael Sarach Havarach. So my tiyufta Rav Chisda tefillin the psuls ba'akum, they can't write the tefillin, but they're in Sarach Havarach. But a yid who makes the tefillin is Sarach Havarach. Okay. The sholach Rav Chia b'Rei Rav Hu Mishmei Rav Yochanan. Al tefillin shel yad omer bracha sher kedushan v'sasav v'tzivanu haniach tefillin, and then when we put on al tefillin shel roish omer bracha sher kedushan v'sasav v'tzivanu al mitzvahs tefillin. V'il lasais tefillin, but when it comes to actually making the tefillin, lo mavarich, right? So that's a kasha, right? Why would it be that we don't make a bracha? Well, you should make a bracha. Because it's an akum can't make tefillin. Elav hainu taima. So let's just hold off 1 second. Let's look at question TA21. Madua al asiyas tefillin ein mevarchin uvamila mevarchin al hasiyah. Okay, we're going to see that right now. Hainu taima kol mitzvah, any mitzvah, diasiyasa gomer mitzvah. Anytime that when you're doing the mitzvah, when you're doing the making of it, that's the actual mitzvah itself, and you complete the mitzvah, could go in milah, right? So by doing milah, that is the completion of the mitzvah. So if that's the case, since it's the Gemara mitzvah, even though an akum could do, nonetheless, for the yid still has to make a bracha on that because it's a gemar. There's nothing else afterwards. However, v'chol mitzvah di asiyasa lav gemar mitzvah, when it's not a completion, could go in tefillin. So you make the tefillin, but it's the wearing of the tefillin is the gemar mitzvah. So afagav the psulos b'hem chachavim, even though it's true that an akum is not allowed to make them, b'Yisrael ein sarach levarech. In that situation, he will not make the bracha. So it's all totally on, is there something else? So if there's something else, like by tefillin, so you make the bracha only when you wear them, not the making. However, when it comes to bris milah, that's it, and that's it. So therefore, the din is that you make a bracha there. Okay, TA21. Tefillin ein asiya gemar mitzvah mashin kin b'milah. Okay, and then that's only part of it. And then it says b'mat tluya hamachloikas im tzitzis mevarchen. When you make the tzitzis, okay. Uva tzitzis b'hak miflagi. And here's the other part. Mar savar chayvus talasu, mar savar chayvus gavrahu. The question is, why do you? What is the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah just having the tzitzis? Let's look at Rashi. Rav Nachman Chisda liba to Rav Chisda savar tzitzis is chayvus talis. It's just on the garment itself, and that's it. Hilkach, once that's it. So a siyasan he gemar mitzvasan. So making it, that's the gemar mitzvah. However, and therefore, since it's the gemar mitzvah, so you make a bracha on the asiyah. However, Rav Nachman savar chayvus garihi. Right, and therefore the actual wearing it is the mitzvah, and therefore you don't make the bracha on the asiyah. So that's the question: is it is the mitzvah tzitzis a chayvus talis or is it a chayvus gavra? Armely Rav Mordechai Rav Ashi Atoyin Hakim Asnisula. So that's how you guys learned it. Anan, however, we Hakim Asnisula. Or maybe Hudam Rav, but then let's Rav Chachavim Shikashera. How do we know that Akum can make tzitzis? Shenemar Dabri Almanei Yisrael Yasul Hem tzitzis. Yasul Hem Acherim, which means that even Acherim, even other people can make the tzitzis. Maybe Hudam Rav Asan Minakaitzin. This is also going in Sukkah. If you made the strings from the kaitzin, min animin, min garden psula. So these are all different types of strings that are part of the garment, and they kind of like frayed a little bit. And now, because you pull them, so you can actually use them as strings, but they were originally not meant for tzitzis, for the threads of the tzitzis. It was part of the beged. Right? There's like the fringes that were dangling. However, minasisin, if you have a big ball of thread, and that's clearly its purpose is for the tzitzis, then kshera, because it wasn't for the sake of the garment. As Rashi says, psula kolzman shemuchubarin lebeged debeina seal shma. While it's still mechubar lebeged, it's not good. Maybe if you peel them off, and all of a sudden they become threads, and then you do it, that's different. Even the ball of thread is possible, because because it has to be spun lishma. Okay. Ketanoi. In fact, we have a machlokes tanoim. Sipun zahav. Let's say you have the tefillin, Rashi says, in which you covered up with gold. O shatoa lehen or behemoth meya, or you have the use of non-kosher hides on these tefillin, psulois. What's the problem with non-kosher hides? So as we're familiar, this famous Gemara, Rashi says, in Gemara Shabbos, it says, Amantia Torah baficha, so it means mina mutter baficha. So it says the Torah is supposed to be in your mouth, and it means only things which are mutter to be put into your mouth, which means only kosher food can be things which are we use to make sefer Torah tefillin mezuzahs. So that's what it means. Shatolin or behema tamei psulos. or behema tahayrik sheris. If we use kosher, then it's fine. The apple bishul ibdan lishman, even though it was not actually processed for the sake of the tefillin, it's still okay. So it's similar to the tzitzis by the season, that the ball of thread, do we need tviyah lishma? So also over here, do you need to have like the dyeing or the tanning process of the hides to be lishma? Armali Abali Rav Shmuel Bar Rav Yehuda Ha Techilta. When we're dealing with this techelis that we've been discussing, exactly what's the process of dyeing it so that it's proper techelis for the tzitzis? So masnisan dam chilazain, we take literally the blood of the chilazain. It could be like a snail, or there's different questions exactly what this chilazain is, fish. V'samnin v'raminan lahu b'yayra. So they take this as well as dyes, and they will soak it and boil in a pot. When it's chinan lay, and it gets all hot. The shakalina port, you take some of it b'viyasa. You take a little bit like in a eggshell. V'ta'imnan lahu ba'oidra, and then you check it with wool to see if it's the proper color of this dye. So you took a little bit of it as like a testing. V'shadin leilahu biyasa kalina. But you have to take that, whatever in that eggshell, and you have to destroy it. You can't use it anymore, and you can't put it back, because that was only used, that was taken out specifically for testing, and therefore you can't use it. So the kalinin lay oidra. So shmamina klos. We actually, from this little process, we see three things. First of all, shmamina t'ima psula. We see that when it comes to the testing materials, that procedure of using those dyes, even though it turns out it was good, you can't use it. Right? It has to be burned. Shmamina devi'inan sevil lishma. The dyeing has to be done with the lishma. Lishmamina t'ima pasla. That the dye in the testing procedure is possible. So hainu t'ima psula hainu tzvil lishma. Sounds like the same thing. So Ravashi matam kamer matam t'ima psula. Why do we say that this testing dye isn't good? Mishum debi'inan tzvil lishma, because it has to be lishma. Kitanoi t'ima. This dye is psul. Mishum shnemer, because it says kalil techeles, which means it's entirely supposed to be made out of techeles. But it, as Rashi says, kol techeles be'inan shehi kol ikr mayra chilazim betsemer shlehe davar achet savua b'amid chilasa. There was nothing else. Nothing else. Divrei Chanina ben Gamliel, Rav Yochanan ben Davoy oimer afilu mayra shei shabah kosher, even if it's like the secondary dye, it's a secondary color which may not have the same potency, it's still okay. Mishum shnemar, because they'll play in words of shnei talas, which is referring to the red thread, but also the word sheni means secondary, and that also would be okay. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan, techeles ein lo bedika. Techeles, there's no way to check it to be able to see if it's good. Therefore, so we want an expert who knows what he's doing, because otherwise there could be problems. Okay. Now, tefillin yesh lahem bedika. There are ways to examine the tefillin to be able to see if the letters are proper. You can just open them up and see what the letters look like. Therefore, nonetheless, we still only want an expert over there, because the ibud, even the dyeing and the tanning rather of the hides, everything has to be done lishma. So we want a mumcha for the tefillin. Svarim and mezuzahs yeshin habedika v'nikim michol adam. It's interesting when it comes to svarim and mezuzahs, anyone can have that. But cheles, and here this is why we're bringing this down, ein lo bedika. And cheles, there's no bedika. He actually was able to be boidik the tcheles. Simin b'gesham. So maisi Magvia Gila, he would bring this alum, Umaya Dish Bililta, and he would have this liquid that came, as Rashi says, min hatiltan, which is fenugreek, umei raglayim, and literally from urine, but was not regular mei raglayim, as we see on Mem Gimel Aleph. Ben Arboim Yoim, 40 days. So there's two opinions. Rashi says it's Metinik Ben Arboim. It has to come from a child who's 40 days old. Or as Rashi says, Lashon Achash Abrim Mem Yoim Mishiyatsu Migufa Adam. Okay, it's 40 days old from any human being, so it may have more potency. Anyway, so we take those things, and we soak the tchelos in it, and ma'orta from night l'saf until the next day. And then we look what happened. If ifrad chazuse, if the color faded and went away a little bit, psula, because then you know it was not tchelos. Lo ifrad chazuse kshera. If it doesn't lose if it doesn't lose the color, then it's fine, because you know it's that's what tchelos does. This will not this testing will only remove a fraud, right? Which is sheker. Alternatively, Rav Ada made the Rabba mishmei the Rav Avira Aimer Maisi Chamira Archasa Desari. You should take some harsh yeast in barley, and you bake the tchelos in it. If it changes for the better, then it's good. Like your use of psula v'simanach sheni sheker shinoi emes. So based on if it's good or bad, if it becomes worse, then you know it's sheker. So anyway, the kash is, we see that tchelos there is bedika. What does that mean? He said there's no bedika. So my in lo bedika nami the kaimer atima, that we don't know necessarily if this tchelos was used for the testing period, the experiment, and then was put back in which it would be puzzle. And that, of course, you don't know. But yeah, you could test to make sure it's good tchelos, but that doesn't help, because if it was for te'ima, this testing procedure, you cannot use that anymore for the actual tchelos, and there's no way to know and to ascertain if that's true. Question, we're going to stop there. Question 13. B'matuli hanidon imavarchin al asiyas tzitzes. So I guess we had that before. So I chayvas talis hu asiyasa gamar mitzvah hi mavarich. If it's a chayv on the talis, that's the completion, you make a bracha. If it's chayvas gavro, you get the mitzvahs actually putting it on and later on, and therefore because of that, you will not make a bracha. So that's what that is. Okay, that's question 13. So it's interesting. The question TA21 had both the questions combined. All right, let's see, maybe one more question. TA22, no. TB24. Madua al siyas tefillin ein mevarchen, uvamil mevarchen al ha'asiyah. So I wrote, ein oimrim el al ha-gemar mitzvah ve'ein asiyas tefillin gemar mitzvah. Okay, I'll accept that. And then b'matluya ha'sheila im hatzis mevarchen al asiyah, same question. I wrote, imachiv al ha-beged atzmo zem gemar, right? V'sar chavarich aval im hachiv hu al hagavra oz lo mevarchinan al asiyas tzitzes. Beautiful. Adkan.